Well, welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. My guests for this episode are David Dye and Karin Hurd, who are the founders of Let's Grow Leaders, a global leadership development firm known for practical tools and leadership development that sticks. They are also the authors of several best-selling books, including Courageous Cultures, How to Build Teams of Micro-Innovators, Problem Solvers and Customer Advocates, and Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict, their brand new book. In this part of my conversation with David and Karin, we cover handling tricky work situations with powerful phrases. Topics include saying no, even to your boss, and effectively voicing overwhelm. David shares a method for team accountability, and we discuss phrases for dealing with workplace challenges like bullies, gossips, and difficult customers. Enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. The other part that not many people talk about, which I love that you included in your book, is you got to know when it's time to quit. And in some cases, you have to accept defeat or just realize, have I tried everything? What do I gain or lose by quitting, right?
When we think about quitting a conflict, it's sometimes like, well, why should I even have the conversation if I'm just going to end up walking away to begin with? Well, we don't know that. You don't know what's going to happen, as we've already talked about, right? So the question is to ask yourself, it's like, okay, have I tried? Have I genuinely made the effort? What do I gain or lose by quitting? There are other extenuating circumstances. Sometimes you may know exactly that you have a values mismatch, but you may choose to stay for a while for some other reason that's not that. But now you have data. And I always think you're better off having the conversation because whatever the outcome, now you have actual data. You know for a fact, as opposed to responding to a story that's in your head and never giving the other person a chance. So when you're looking at like, how is this conflict affecting other parts of my life? If I'm becoming like the person that's driving me crazy, then this is probably not a good outcome for me. And I need to consider, should I remove myself from it in terms of how I'm showing up or things like that?
Yeah, and then what's on the other side of speaking up? Sometimes you quit the conflict, but if you have said yes to your values, then you come out with something unexpected on the other side. So I had been in a quick quick example. I was working and I just had led a team that we had staged this massive organizational turnaround. Like things were going so well. And basically, what we had done was helped all of our business process outsourcer call centers to go from a bad experience to they were now at parity with internal centers. And so my boss comes to me and says, "Oh my gosh, my boss, so my boss's boss, wants to take you on the corporate jet. So fancy, so exciting. And we're going to go visit all these, some of these centers so she can see what's going on." So I am super excited. And we're on the jet, and they've got this beautiful spread of food. And I mean, this is just amazing. We do that. We go to the first call center, and they've got another huge spread of food. And the my boss's boss walks up to this buffet. She picks up one hard boiled egg and says, "Does anybody have any salt?" Which is a very reasonable question to ask when handed a hard boiled egg, except that this call center was in the middle of nowhere. There was no cafeteria and nobody could find any salt. Okay, so everybody starts scrambling. She's like, "I really need salt." All right, scramble. We're only supposed to be there for an hour, spend 20 minutes looking for the freaking salt. Okay, so we settle down. She has her egg, has some salt, and then she proceeds to do what I can only describe as toxic courage crushing behavior to everyone in the meeting. Now, I am completely devastated because I thought we were taking the jet on a little celebration tour and to do recognition. And meanwhile, I'm feeling like we're undoing this relationship that I've spent all this time doing. I'm very upset. So we get back on the jet, and my boss looks at my, as we've already discussed, not poker face, and says, "Karin, if you care about your career, you're not going to say what you're about to say." Okay. Now there's a difference between courage and stupidity. Right. So I did not say a word in that moment. That would have been direct insubordination. Right. But what I did do was go to the back of the jet, pull out my laptop and I just started writing down all the things that I believed about human-centered leadership because she was not a human-centered leader. Apparently, she was an egg-centered leader. And so what I did then was that Sunday started my blog, Let's Grow Leaders, which then really started to take off, get an international following. 1 year later, I resigned from this company, and since then, we've written all these books, we travel all over the world, we're doing exactly what we feel like we're meant to do. So sometimes you're not going to say what you need to say in that moment, but I still said what I needed to say, and it's made all the difference. And that's our hope for people too.
Let's move now into the section of tackling tricky workplace situations. We're not going to be able to cover them all, but I'd like to hit upon one or two. And that first one, I'm going to combine a couple categories and just kind of say my favorite phrase. If there's other phrases that come to mind that would help out in that situation, please add that or add some more depth to what I'm saying. And the first one is saying no to your boss can help with feelings of overwhelm. And a lot of people have a difficult time in saying no. And the phrases aren't unique. I mean, but thank you so much for thinking of me. I'm honored. I'm so sorry I can't say yes to this right now. It sounds better, but it definitely sends the message that thanks, but no thanks.
And, and that's an example of the one you just shared. Maybe that's the one I might use with a colleague if they're inviting me to a project or something like that. But you can use these with your boss too. And the mindset here, as you're listening to this, is every time you say yes to something, you are saying no to something else. It's just a passive no. So if you say yes to some extra work, you're saying no to potentially your own health or a relationship or the quality of any of the work that you're doing. You're saying no to something. And so it's to change that from a passive no to a conscious, intentional no that's going to help you to be as effective as possible for yourself and for the work that matters most. So if you're talking to your boss, you say yes to say no. So the way you might do this is say, hey, listen, boss comes and says, hey, I've got this project. I want you to do this. And you're like, oh my goodness, how is this going to work? All right. Hey, boss, I am super committed to the success of the team and the work that we're doing here and what we're trying to achieve here. And what you're asking me to do here, so that I'm going to get to clarity. And this is kind of, we're going to combine all four dimensions here. What you're asking me to do would mean this. So you discuss the trade offs. And I'm concerned about that because of these consequences. Then you explain what you believe would happen. Then you might suggest, this is the get curious part, how about we approach it this way? Or what if we were to prioritize it this way? Or can you help me reprioritize so that we can create room to, if this needs to be a number one, that we can do that? So I'm not just flat out saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm saying yes to the person. And that's what we say yes to when we're saying no. I say yes to the person, yes to the value of what we're doing, clarify the consequences, what else is going on, and then get curious in terms of what's possible, exploring that together. And now you have an opportunity again. So often your own manager doesn't know the reality of everything that you're doing. So if you give them that information and then ask for their perspective, now you have opened the door to another productive conversation.
It may not be cut or dry. I mean, it may be a both and. I mean, David and I really just went through this conflict. So we were speaking at ATD, and I get this idea that we should exhibit at ATD too, which would have been a great idea if I'd thought about it 9 months ago. But I'm like, and now it's become a bit of an emergency. So David said yes and no at the same time. He said, yes, I understand why you think this is such a great idea now. We've got the new book coming out. We've got the new Synergy Stack collaboration system. I understand your motivation completely. And I've got to tell you that I can't possibly be the operator of this. Like, because all these other things, like everything else that's on my plate. And he says, but if you can figure out how to leverage our other resources on the team so that I don't have to be at the center of operationalizing all of it, then I would love to go. I will be with you in the booth and I will support you. And that's exactly what happened. And bless her heart, Carrie on our team is doing all the operating. And but in the past, that's not normally how it would have gone, right? Like David really gets into a lot of the operations stuff. So there was innovation on the other side of that because in fact, she's bringing things and ideas to this that I don't think that either one of us would have thought of. So we're actually after that conflict, we're in a better place, I think, than if he had just said, "All right, I'll just do it because Karen asked."
Excellent point. And that helps with overwhelm as well. One of the questions I love that you include with overwhelm, because not many people are willing to ask this, is if I had to drop a ball here, which ball would it be? People just think they can juggle more and more balls, right? Spread themselves thinner and thinner. In reality, you're not going to do as well, right? It's better to move a couple things a foot than maybe 20 things an inch. And in some cases, you're not even having traction on those things if you have too many balls that you're juggling in the air.
Yeah, Charles, we did the program with IMS on, really important leadership competencies. And one of those was called Mind the MIT. And, really staying focused on what's most important. And that, that is where is this my MIT right now? And if it's not, maybe that's the ball that it does need to drop.
Let's move on to what if your team is not accountable or lacks accountability? You have a great tool called the Inspire method that perhaps you could unpack for our listeners.
Well, again, this one's a combination of these 4 dimensions. So when you're having this kind of thing where you're feeling like there's a team member who is not accountable, or maybe they're being lazy, or whatever our interpretation of events is, and it's important to remember that's our interpretation. First question is, do we have a foundation of clarity? Do we actually have a shared agreement about what success looks like, what a successful outcome would do, so forth? Because often they might be working on a different priority, or maybe not. Maybe they're sitting around on, scrolling social media and doing the reels all day, depending on what's going on. So then we're going to go to connection. And so the first 3 steps in the Inspire method are all about connecting to the person, to our intent for the conversation, and to the facts as we see them. So, hey, listen, I really care about our co-working relationship here, and I want to make sure that we're carrying equal weight, that we're feeling good about our work together. And I've noticed that, and then you share the facts about whatever it is that you've seen, and supporting evidence and so forth. So that's I initiate the conversation with sharing your intent and starting it off. N, notice, inspire is an acronym. So IN, notice specific activity, behavior, whatever it is, or what you're not noticing, either way. And then S is, what are some of your supporting examples? So that's starting with connection. And then we're going to move to curiosity. And the curiosity is P, probe, and then I, invite. And probe is getting their perspective. So I'm curious, how's this look from your perspective? Going back to one of the goats, what's happening here for you? How does this look from where you sit? Any of those kinds of questions where we get their perspective on it, which again could be different than ours. And it might be, yeah, I don't want to work very hard, and I don't feel like I have to because our manager doesn't hold us accountable. All right, well, if that's what we hear, then at least we know that's where they're coming from. If there's not some other kind of disagreement or misinterpretation or anything like that. Then I is like, what do you think we can do to, and it's inviting them to come up with a solution so that there's some ownership from them. And often these things are competing priorities. There's we have different values. We're approaching things from a different perspective. They may have an emphasis on quality or drawing something out, and I may have an emphasis on speed. And so it's not that they're lazy, it's that we're working from different perspectives. So in my invitation to a solution, I might, say something like, you know, all right, recognizing that forever is too long and today is too short, what reasonably could work for you here? How do you think we might approach this? So I'm trying to draw them into the solution set there. And then R and E are review and enforce. And this is getting to the commitment of the 4 dimensions. The fourth one is commitment. We're creating a shared commitment. Review is, so what I hear you saying is, let's try it this way. And my part would be this, and your part would be that. Do I have that right? And then that final step, that enforce step, is scheduling the finish, which you mentioned earlier in commitment of, let's put some time on the calendar to talk about this and see how it's going, see how our agreement is working out for all the reasons that we talked about earlier.
Great framework. It structures that conversation so much better than if you try to come up with it ad hoc or at the time of. It just those things really need to be planned out, and having that framework really helps. Before we end today's episode, I'd love to talk about 2 difficult people that I hear a lot of leaders struggle with in the workplace: the bullies and the gossips.
Yeah, to me, it's very much the what you were saying is that's not okay. Calling out the behavior, or I've noticed that you are, or that you did. What is observing the behavior. What doesn't work is to call them a bully. you know, I notice you're being a bully. Because a bully is an interpretation. Well, what does that mean? So you're much better to go to what is the behavior that you're seeing. Yeah, I noticed that you did this in this meeting, and that's not okay.
We had a client one time who had someone tell him he was a bully, and he had no idea. And he genuinely went and started asking around, and people started verifying. Well, yeah, validating. Yeah, you can be, and it was life changing for him. And he really didn't want to be that way. So it's like even then, there's so much value in having these conversations.
Gossiping is just as prevalent now as what it was when everyone was back in the office. And it's hard to deflect it. It's hard to have the courage to either use humor, which I find a little bit more difficult for me, versus just asking for help, right? I've heard there's a rumor going around. What do you think I could do to help stop this unfair workplace gossip from spreading? Any other suggestions regarding confronting it and hopefully getting ahead of that issues to get it to stop?
Yeah, there's 2 kinds of gossip, right? There's the gossip that's not true, and then there's the gossip that is true, has a grain of truth to it, right? And I think, but so David just wrote an article that is getting a huge, a lot of attention on confident how to handle confidential information. So I'm going to let him speak to that piece of it because that sometimes there's a rumor going around, but it's based in something confidential that you can't say. But I think with the where I like to bring in the humor, and this actually happened to me. There was this massive rumor going on when I was in my corporate job, and it was because most of the guys, people on my team were men. I had one woman on my team. They didn't want me in the job anyway because they didn't think I had the background for it. And I hadn't built the relationships yet. It was all very new. And so they're like, "Oh, yeah, she's having an affair with this one woman on the team, and she's gonna go to Jamaica, and they're gonna be on vacation together." Like, and I'm like, if I was gonna go to Jamaica, it would be with my toddler in tow, right? I mean, this is not, it just completely wasn't fun. And I said, "You know what? What you were describing here is a lot more exciting than my actual life." you know? And, and I said, "Can you just stop it? Like, this isn't true. Like, it's not true. So why are you doing this to me?" You know? So that's, so it's a way of asking for what you need. And also a way of asking for what you need is asking people to help stop the rumor. Like, so I go to you and Charles, maybe I suspect that you're spreading the rumor. So I say, "Charles, this is crazy, but there is this crazy rumor going on about me. Would you help me stop that rumor?" So I'm not accusing you, but you have this like doubt, like, well, maybe she does know it's me. And so therefore even if you don't get involved in stopping it, you're probably gonna not spread gossip at that point.
And when we're talking about gossip, and there's a commonality with bullies here too. You see so much of the research on this that there's so much power in the bystander, the person who's maybe not directly involved. They're not the person spreading the rumor, nor are they the subject of the rumor, or they're not the bully, they're not the subject of the bullying in that instance, but the bystander who can help to stop and call attention to, hey, does this conversation feel fair to you? Would you oh, would if someone were saying this about you, would you want me to tell you? Would you want to have that conversation? And doing some of those kinds of things to just draw attention to it and go, yeah, okay, not cool, and kind of remember, call people back to their best self, if you will. And when Karen mentioned earlier, there are the rumors that are based in truth, but that you are committed to not being able to talk about for whatever reason. And those can be for very legitimate reasons, maybe for securities integrity. You don't want to be on the wrong end of securities fraud, right? It can be for product launches. It can be for personnel issues. There's lots of valid reasons you might not be able to say anything. And your team comes after you like, well, is this true? Is that true? So in those instances, to maintain your integrity while also not spreading a rumor and to try to de-escalate things is the best thing is if you have a reliable track record of communicating very clearly and dependably and reliably when something is known. And so that's your number one, if people have that confidence in your clarity. And then from there, you can be upfront, say, listen, rumors and insinuation, gossip, they only make these things worse. I promise you that when there is something to be said, you will be the first one to hear it, and you'll hear it from me, and to reassure people in that way. And sometimes, again, the connection, like, hey, no, I know that this can be a stressful time when all this kind of this stuff's in the air. I get that. And I will share more as soon as I have it to share with you, as soon as I can do that. And if it's a personnel matter, then, one is calling back to your connection, your commitment to the person that you're talking with. Hey, listen, this isn't something I can talk about. And if you're ever in this kind of situation, I want you to have the confidence that I will never share that inappropriately with anybody else. And that's why I'm not going to share this with you and have that conversation. So, in all of those ways, you're reaffirming your integrity. You're actually providing safety and confidence for the person you're talking to if you're in a management leadership position.
Great advice. The last question I'd like to ask, because I know everyone has, and maybe this can be the final piece of advice that you give our listeners, they have common concerns, issues with difficult customers. And it's more prevalent today than probably ever. And some customers are jerks, but the majority are like us, right? They're doing their best to get through a tough day, and they need to be seen and heard. You give a great 5-step process for dealing with difficult customers. Perhaps you can share that in just maybe one powerful phrase that you can use in dealing with that difficult person.
I think the most important thing you can do is to make sure that they feel heard. So the tell me more goat is one of the most important things. Because imagine, I mean, we're all of us are all have these stories where you're dealing with a customer service person and they're not listening to you. So hear their story and then do a reflect to connect back. Sounds to me like you're really angry about this. And you can also say, if I were you in your situation, I would be this, I would be angry too, which is true because if you were them, you would feel that way, right? But even though you're not saying they're right, because you might not be able to completely reverse, but I hear you. And then I'm confident we can find a solution here, is to express that when I was, the call centers organizations, that was, how do you show up as an interested in the person, interested in solving the problem, and an expert. And if in the first 40 seconds of a customer communication, you can show them that you are caring and competent with your words, that is going to de escalate a situation.
That empathy and sincerity is so important when you're doing that. So going back to, is your, even if you're just on the phone, is your body language and true gut emotion really matching the words coming out of your mouth? Because we know if it's not a line, oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Dye, that happened. Like if it's not real, we know, and it's worse than not saying anything.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just a word choice. Like, if you go to Chick-fil-A, you'll notice that they always say "my pleasure," and you go to some other places and they say "not no problem." Like there is a big difference between "no problem" and "my pleasure." Yeah.
Well, thank you, David and Karen, for joining me again on the podcast today. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you, learn more about your work, and get your new book.
All right. Well, thank you so much. So, our company is called Let's Grow Leaders, and the book is Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict. And it is really available anywhere that you would like. And since your people are listening to podcasts, you might be an Audible person. And it is read on Audible by us. So that's one thing. And then we would love to connect on LinkedIn. I'm Karen with an I, Karen Hurt, and David Dye, DYE. And we have a program coming up with you later this year on navigating workplace conflict at IMS.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.